and welcome to another episode of the Dugout Debate. My name is Josh, and as usual, I'm joined by my fellow presenters, partisans, and pundits, and my pals, Chris and Alex. And after a rather hectic week of football, I suppose I'd better ask how you guys are doing.
Chris, Chris just sitting there like, yeah, right.
Not to answer it.
In terms of life, I'm good. In terms of football, I'm metaphorically shitting myself as Liverpool do their very best to bottle their top four hopes. But I mean, sure, things we'll get into later in the debate. So I'm all right. Thank you very much.
I guess Chris is a prologue to the first topic. The big question is who let the dugout?
Oh God. I hate you both so much.
Why'd you keep doing this then?
So, as always, we're starting off with our pitch of the week in a round called Picture This, which is a rather jubilant Paul Clement on the touchline at Swansea. So, guys, what's going on?
I'll start this one off. Is Paul Clement celebrating using a new celebration, which is the YMCA?
Is he saying to his players, if you don't do chin-ups like this, you're doing it wrong?
I mean, technically, he's not wrong if he's saying that, because, you know, Jim Lad Alex knows all the stuff. But,
Yeah.
probably the best joke anyone's going to make, actually, that. Is he celebrating being actually the best team in the country?
Wales.
Yeah, I'll say that, yeah.
Yeah, take a moment.
Is he using his hands to show the gulf in managerial capability between himself and Bob Bradley?
Or is he perhaps celebrating the fact that 2 club corps are being uploaded in one day, like subscribe?
Bet he is.
No, the actual answer
Or
is
is
he celebrating the Red Xbox said reaching 1,000 subscribers on YouTube?
You bet he is, Richard.
Yes.
Is he...
YouTube poops in 1 week? Yes.
Our very own celebrity Chris Fowler, a.k.a. the Red Xbox nerd.
Is he quite simply just going, nah, Sabenya?
No, he's not.
Okay.
What on earth makes you think that, Chris?
That's just the most brutal shutdown.
No, he's not.
Hang on, Chris, look at the picture. That's some wide-ass fucking baby Simba he's holding up there. No, of course, he's celebrating Swansea's, I believe it was a 1-0 win against Everton.
Yeah, that is correct. And it was quite a win for the Swans, beating Everton, who are kind of maybe unrealistically pushing for a Europa League spot as the Premier League draws to a close. But my first question is to you, Chris. Are Swansea going to beat the drop? I mean, they've had some decent results since Paul Clement took over, and that win against Everton really is a hallmark of what he's looking to achieve should he continue to stay on beyond this season. So is it possible that they will avoid dropping into the Championship next season?
I feel quite possibly now that it's purely been on Hull's part that they are now out of the drop zone. Of course, Swansea had to beat a very good Everton side, but Hull losing 2-0 at home to Sunderland after the incredible home record that Marco Silva's had, that alone is quite frankly reason enough to go down. If you can allow Billy fucking Jones to score against you, you deserve to be relegated.
Well put. I like that from you, Chris. Billy fucking Jones.
We can put Swansea's survival down to one factor, and that's Billy Jones.
Doesn't
even play
Billy. No, not Billy Jones, Josh. Billy fucking Jones.
Fucking Jones.
Billy effing Jones for our younger viewers.
Oh no, we're going to lose all of that YouTube ad money we would have otherwise had. No.
Hey,
if
you're on 28 subscribers, every subscriber counts.
Whereas when you're on
Mum,
1,000 subscribers,
Nah, dog. My other 2 accounts.
So,
Dog
Lavery, obviously Swansea have been very fickle with their managerial choices over the last 2 or 3 years. They've had Michael Laudrup, Gary Monk, Bob Bradley, Francesco Guidolin, and now, of course, Paul Clement. But do you think they will stick with Paul Clement? Because obviously, with him performing very well at the moment, there's no reason for them to sack him. But in the past, they've had no reason to sack the manager that they have. So do you think, if they were to say up, that he'll still keep his job?
I would be very, very surprised if if they beat the drop, of course, if they beat the drop, I'd be very, very surprised if they sacked him, just purely because they haven't sacked other managers at points in the season where things have been very certain or uncertain. They've genuinely tended to sack managers off the back of a couple of losses in a row, regardless of league position. Whereas this will be a very certain point. Like, they will have actually, hypothetically, in a situation where they stay up, they will have absolutely stayed up. There's no danger of perhaps a dip in form and then they potentially go down. They've actually stayed up. And I think that if they manage to do that, which would be a great success for the club considering the actual season that they've had, I think that they would have absolutely no real reason to sack him. Whereas whilst the reasons they've had have been poor for other managers, perhaps, they have had their reasons. Whereas I can see no feasible thing that they can say that can justify sacking a manager who's kept them up after the season they've had. So I would be very, very surprised if they did sack him.
And switching from Clement to his counterpart on the day, and Ronald Koeman, he was reported as saying to the Spanish media that he dreams to manage both, or dreams of managing both Barcelona and the Dutch national team. I'll throw this out to both of you. Do you think that they're credible goals for him at this moment in time?
Dutch national team, potentially. Barcelona, not particularly. I mean, the Dutch national team at the moment is probably about as poor as it's been. Like, comparatively to the incredible teams that you had during periods such as the 80s, like, the Dutch team is nothing these days. So it's not, obviously, if you're managing your own national team, it's prestigious to you, like on a personal level. But on a footballing level, being the manager of the Dutch national team at the moment is not prestigious. So that's a very feasible goal for somebody who is admittedly a fairly decent manager. But I mean, I think the two operative words there, fairly decent. He's not an incredible manager. And Barcelona, aside from tending to have very good managers, obviously, whether you think Luis Enrique has been a particularly good manager is up for debate. But they've also tended to go towards Spanish managers as well. And I would not say that Ronald Koeman is either particularly good or particularly Spanish. So he just doesn't really fit the bill of what I would consider to be a Barcelona coach. So I can't personally see it happening unless he goes and does something incredibly successful with a different club, which he hasn't shown that he's going to do yet. So we'll see, but I doubt it.
Okay.
I feel quite similar, actually. I feel that Koeman would have to prove himself at a bigger club than somewhere like Everton or the other clubs he's been at. I know he's been at pretty big sides like Valencia, and am I right that he was with Feyenoord in his native? So he's certainly been around. He's been managing pretty much across Europe, but none of these teams have really been as prestigious as something like Barcelona. As for the Dutch national team, it can be a pretty good pedestal to get yourself a decent managerial job if you do well with them. I mean, look at Louis van Gaal. He ended up getting the Man United job on the back of the Netherlands' third place finish in the last World Cup. So perhaps if Koeman goes and manages the Dutch national side, I know they've been in absolutely dire straits at the moment. So perhaps if he does take that, it could work out well for him if he gets the right players and makes the sort of shrewd choices that perhaps someone like Gareth Southgate has been making for England recently, picking players based on their form rather than their names. I feel like that's probably where the Dutch are failing at the moment. So, yeah, Koeman could be a big manager in years to come.
It was certainly an interesting aspiration of his to manage both Barcelona and the Dutch national side. But moving on to a more sensitive topic, obviously the Dugout debate doesn't really shy away from the controversial issues in the footballing world, and this episode is no different. But obviously we have had the sad news that Aaron Lennon has been sectioned under the Mental Health Act following causes for concern for his own well-being. We'll focus more on Lennon in a little while, but I want to just ask a broader question about mental health in football first of all, and I'll start with you, Chris. Obviously, Lennon being a professional footballer, we often think about all the money that they get and think, oh, they must have such an easy life doing a job that they love, etc. But do you think that footballers tend to get dehumanised and therefore when things like this happen to them, it comes as a massive shock?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, but you have to take into account that in some aspects, they're almost like reality TV stars. You see them nearly every week on the television, and you just sort of create your own perspectives of people, and it's just completely dehumanizing because you never really see anything other than themselves on the pitch. Perhaps not the same with someone like Cristiano Ronaldo or Lionel Messi, who of course get all this extra charitable work that gets broadcasted, or all the big advertising deals they do and stuff like that. So with Aaron Lennon, it's sort of the former that I was discussing. He's not really been seen quite recently. I don't think he's played for Everton in any recent games, perhaps probably because of this issue that he's had with his mental health. But it's almost reminiscent of how a lot of footballers have been treated when they've come out as being gay. It's this sort of perspective that we have of football as being all like proper hard men.
Yeah.
And we just can't seem to get past the fact that, oh, no, wait, they may like men. They may have problems with their mental health. We just forget all about that.
Following on from that, you were talking about footballers that are coming out as gay, and there's still, generally speaking, not that many that have. Who say that whether there are or there aren't, but there isn't that many. But also, there are a lot of organisations that are trying to promote the coming out of gay footballers. There's also the promotion of things like the Kick It Out campaign to combat racism. But Alex, what do you think can be done to combat the stigma of mental health in football?
I think it's a broader issue than football itself, to be honest. I think that half of it does come down to the fact that the game we're talking about, obviously there's men's and women's football, but the game we're primarily talking about on this show is men's football. And there's a massive stigma about men talking about mental health issues because it's almost a sign of weakness. There was a tweet, and it really got under my skin, that I saw the other day from reputable source Piers Morgan, who's totally not an arsehole. And he put a tweet out. Someone was talking about mental health, and he was like, and he just completely debunked the idea of men talking about mental health. He said, "I prefer sort of the King Philip role model, stiff upper lipped, don't need to talk about our emotions. It's not relevant." And I just think that is coming from somebody who's clearly totally ignorant of how mental health issues actually work. Because people that haven't had mental health issues have a tendency to associate things like depression and feeling sad, because they seem like reasonable things to actually relate together. And obviously, I'm not medically diagnosed as depressed, so I don't have that much understanding about it either. But what I do have some understanding of is, and I'll happily openly say this, that it's very mild, but I've got a little bit of an anxiety disorder, and people associate being worried about something as well with anxiety. And people who haven't been through mental health issues before don't understand that being worried about an exam isn't the same as having an anxiety attack and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So the fact of the matter is that there are still people that genuinely discourage men in particular from talking about mental health issues. And the people that do that it's paradoxical, because they don't understand, those are the people that don't understand what mental health issues are actually like, because they think it's just something you can deal with like a normal emotion, which is not. And I don't think football is really the centre of mental health issues. The mental health issues are something that's worldwide. It's something that's generally a problem, and it's slowly getting better. More people are starting to talk about it, but until there's a really pioneering thing where people are coming out and really saying this is what mental health issues are, so people who are currently holding the Piers Morgan type opinions understand the difference between mental health and just negative emotion. Until that actually happens, people won't understand the importance of mental health, and the whole issue won't change, and that'll go down to football at its roots as well.
And another question that I'll open up to the both of you, and it's a slightly more cynical one, but I think it's one that still needs to be considered just for debate's sake. Stan Collymore has come out recently in support of Aaron Lennon, and also stating his well-publicised, his own battle with depression, which I think was in 1999. Unfortunately for him, his career never really did pick up again. He spent time in the Priory rehabilitating. Do you think there's a chance that Aaron Lennon's career could suffer as a result of this mental health issue that he clearly has? Obviously, the most important thing is that he does get better, but do you think he will be able to get back to where he was before?
I think it totally depends on the extent of what his mental health issues are. That hasn't been, I don't believe, unless I've not read up on it, I don't believe the extent of what his mental health issues are have been released to the public. And I think that there is a huge spectrum of how serious mental health issues can be. And obviously, on one end of the spectrum, you've got incredibly debilitating mental health issues. And on the other end, you've got mental health issues that you can kind of deal with. Obviously, again, like people do live with mild depression and they're okay with it. People do live with mild anxiety. The fact that he's been sectioned under the Mental Health Act and the fact that we haven't seen him for a while does suggest he's on the more serious spectrum. So I do worry that we're perhaps not going to see him again, because that does sound like it is potentially quite serious. But I think you put it absolutely perfectly. The most important thing is that the guy's health is in good nick. And I mean, if he does have to retire, again, he's been playing football for a while. He's been playing at a high level. He's going to have the wherewithal to retire from football and be okay financially, which is a good thing as well. And yeah, like I say, the most important thing is he does what is best for him mentally.
I think we should also commend the police who went out and found him.
Yeah, 100%.
By a very busy motorway, and they deserve full credit for bringing him round and getting to safety.
Yeah. And obviously we do wish Aaron a full recovery, and it would be lovely to see him out on the pitch again, but who knows? But moving on from a very, very sensitive topic, which we couldn't ignore, and we may end up running over, but on this occasion I think it's worth it to talk about such a massive issue that is existing in the world at the moment, not just in football, as you said, but in general. But we will still move on to what's meant to be a more light-hearted topic. Who knows what we're going to come out with. It is our phrase of the week, which is, nobody wanted to do that to me. So the ball's in your court. I'm cringing before we even started. It can be if you want it to be.
Chris, do you want to start this? Because I think you've got one more answer than I do.
No, I'll start. So, is this David Moyes in a press conference after he's tried to sign players?
Is it basically just a general description of mine and Chris's sex life?
Yeah, that is correct.
I wrote myself into it as well. I got you covered, don't worry.
See, my next one was going to be, is this the sort of joke you'd both make about me?
Also correct.
Nobody wanted to do that with me. Is that Josh explaining why he's never managed to successfully Netflix and chill to Le Pen and Trump speeches?
I don't have Netflix.
It's too long.
There's a simple reason for that one.
Josh is just there like YouTube and chill. No worries. Problem solved.
Is this
emotion?
Is this what Jamie Vardy said after he tried to arrange a second trip to Thailand?
Oh, wow.
Oh, that's good. No, of course, it is part of a sort of mini phrase that Buffon did when he was talking about swapping shirts with Mbappe, and how no one ever swapped shirts with him when he was younger, so he wanted to give something back to a younger player.
It's correct. I'll just read out the full quote. I swapped my shirt with Mbappe because when I was young, nobody wanted to do that with me. I hated it. So I will move on to Juventus afterwards, but I will start with Kylian Mbappe. He's rumoured to be sought after by a variety of Europe's elite, including potentially the subject of a £75 million bid from Manchester United. But my first question is he worth that amount of money? And would you like to see, probably more appropriate to Alex than you, Chris, but would you like to see your club spend that amount of money on a player like Mbappe?
I'll jump in on this one because, I do support a Premier League club. Take that, Chris. I again, obviously, I'll take sort of dependent on teams and what their strengths and weaknesses are out of account, because that's a little bit boring. Mbappe is a difficult case because I think he's a classic example of something that's happening quite a lot at the moment, which is clubs bidding ridiculous amounts on what are, in fairness, fairly unproven talents. Like, don't get me wrong, Mbappe's played at very high levels this season. He did what the entirety of Barcelona's incredible attacking force couldn't do, score against Juventus. So he's clearly got some talent, but he is still technically unproven. He's had one season. And I'm trying desperately to remember who it was, but someone signed, I think it might be Real Madrid, that signed a Brazilian 16-year-old, dubbed as like the next Neymar, for something like 45 million euros.
They did sign
a couple of days ago.
That's what I'm thinking of as well.
No, it wasn't Odegaard. It was literally in the last few days. Anyway, some club has done that. I'll have a look when Chris is next talking. But Mbappe is clearly very, very talented. He's one of those strikers that has that natural instinct about movement. like I saw a video which led to him having a chance in, I believe, the first leg against Juventus. And his movement for an 18-year-old, that kind of awareness is incredible, and you can't teach that. And there are very, very few strikers in the world that have that. So that leads me to think that he's going to be one of those things that's kind of worth the hype. Now, 75 million, we could go into a whole conversation about how ridiculous the transfer market is. But in today's transfer market, 75 million for somebody who looks like they could prove to be the real deal. If he turns out to be anything like a Thierry Henry-esque striker, then 75 million, 100% worth it.
So, Chris, he scored 14 goals in 26 League 1 appearances this season and 5 goals in 8 Champions League appearances. If he leaves, though, do you think that Monaco's chances of league success and progressing to the same extent they have in the Champions League will be severely diminished? Because, as we mentioned in previous weeks, Mbappe, so they've still got a pretty decent squad. So do you think that their chances of progressing will be diminished should he leave?
Quite possibly, but you do have to bear in mind that Monaco have been one of the most free-scoring teams across the top 5 European leagues. So they have players who can score up and down the pitch. Falcao has found his form again after his serious leg injury. They've got Jean Moutinho as well in their team. They've got plenty of players who can score. But I feel like, just to go back to your previous question, I feel like Monaco may want to hold on to Mbappe for a bit longer, because then once he's actually proven himself a bit more, they could potentially get even more money for him, which may still be a ridiculous amount. But with the talent that he is showing, then it would certainly be worth it. Also, I feel like perhaps Mbappe would want to stay as well, because Monaco look pretty set to get the Ligue 1 title this season. So he may want to carry on with the Principality for a bit longer. And then they may even progress further in the Champions League next season. But yeah, it's all about proving himself a bit more before moving to a big money team, because like we've seen with Martin Odegaard, it can completely ruin your talent and your potential to go on to be something special, to use a
But the issue with Mbappe as well, not so much Mbappe, with Monaco, is the fact that as much as being quite a prestigious club in terms of what they've achieved this season, what they look like they may well go on to achieve in Ligue 1 as well, when you think about them in context of big football teams, they're not the sort of team that you think when you're a kid, this is the team I want to play for. They don't provide you with, I one day want to, go and play in front of crowds of 60,000 every week. Monaco's stadium capacity is 18,000. They're not, until very recently, they weren't really a club that took football very seriously. They have a small stadium. Monaco is not known for football. It's known for
they were in the
and other stuff as well.
They were runners up in the Champions League in 2004.
2004, yeah. To Porto, wasn't it?
Yeah, Mourinho's Porto.
Yeah. But I think just in general,
the stadium that Monaco have can fit half the population of Monaco in it. So
yeah, true.
For a small, it's pretty much, it's a principality. It's not going to have that many people, but of course, with the money that the country itself has and the club certainly have, they can probably progress on to build a bigger stadium with the prestige that they'll get from most likely winning the Ligue 1 title.
True.
From they're running the Champions League this season, that's going to be a lot of financial investment coming in there.
Final question on the Champions League, because I'm quite keen to move on to our final topic. Juventus are in the final. Are they the best club in the world?
Ooh, that's such a tough question, dude.
If they beat Real, then yes. But I honestly do not know which way that's going to go. It's highly likely that Real will progress to the final. I mean, they're playing Atletico Madrid as we speak. And yes, that's actually the final Madrid derby and last Champions League game to be played at the Vicente Calderon, which, similarly to Spurs leaving White Hart Lane, is sad. And a lot of these old stadiums pretty much being demolished. Like you said earlier in the chat, Josh, just to steal your little message. But Juventus, I spoke a little while ago, they have a defence that is just a brick wall. And I honestly do not know whether BBC will be able to get past them.
it's difficult with Juve as well because I think that it is the ultimate matchup you could think of to prove if Juve are the best team in the world. Because all other things being equal, I know obviously there's very tight race for the La Liga title and stuff. When you look at the actual teams and what they achieve sort of year in, year out, you have to say Real Madrid are the best team in the world. You absolutely just have to. In terms of quality all over the pitch, as it stands. And I think that Juve are the main team that I would say might actually challenge them for that. Don't get me wrong, Barcelona are unbelievable. But Barcelona are also... I don't think their defence is that great. They do ship goals left, right and centre, although they happen to outscore people most of the time. And they do lose silly games, like, not frequently, but you do see it happen 4 or 5 times in the La Liga season. Whereas Juventus don't lose silly games. That's what blows me away about Juventus. They're so unbelievably consistent. Go on, Chris.
I saw a stat earlier on, and Juventus have gone unbeaten at home in something like 640 odd days.
Yeah, it's like 56. I think they lost their last home game 57 games ago or something.
Ridiculous how good they are.
Yeah, they're unbelievable. And again, like I say, it's all down to that defence. Italians know how to defend. Everyone knows that. And they have an entirely Italian. They have that back three. Then they have wing backs, and they've got just players at the moment as well who are just playing absolutely out their skin. We know Dybala's talented and he's playing unbelievably. But everyone's criticisms of Higuain, which I can't imagine why they still exist. He scores goals left, right, and centre. Although he does have a tendency to bottle big games, so we'll see how that goes in the final.
Which was a fantastic tactical decision.
Yeah, and I mean, Dani Alves at the moment, 34 years of age, coming back from a broken leg.
That absolute
just ridiculous at the moment. So just all over the pitch, Juve are just so solid. So I think I would say that they are the toughest team in the world to beat, but that's not necessarily the best team in the world. So we'll see how that matchup goes, assuming that happens in the final.
I guess we'll say whoever wins the Champions League will get branded the best club in the world. But moving on to our final topic of the episode, which will also lead on to our dugout debate at the end. We're going to talk about football club owners, and in particular, football club owners in the top 4 flights of English football. Just going to rattle off a few teams here that have had some questionable owners in the last decade or so. Aston Villa, Blackburn Rovers, Blackpool, Charles Athletic, Leeds United, Portsmouth, the list does go on. My first question for you, Alex, is should the Premier League or the EFL or even the Football Association be allowed to intervene if they deem a club to be run badly?
I personally, off the back of some things that have happened this season, which I will go on to personally in the dugout debate with my choice, I think that the FA is already reconsidering rules about intervention in clubs off the back of what's happened to Leyton Orient this season with how badly that club's been run. But I think that you think about the club as a whole, and unless you really think about it, it's difficult to think about a club as all of the different parts it's made up at. Like, hundreds of jobs are within that club. Yeah. And with Leyton Orient in particular, there are hundreds of people that are working for Leyton Orient who have been out of pay for weeks, months, and and that's absolutely ridiculous. And I don't know what wages are like if you're working, in certain parts of a club, but if you're just like serving food at a football club, that's not going to be like a massive wage. And imagine that you're trying to pay rent every single week, and a football club doesn't do that. That wrecks lives. And I think that the FA need to have something in place where if something does get that bad, if it's getting to a point where it's genuinely ruining lives beyond just supporters being annoyed at their owner, I think that intervention does need to be a thing that happens.
It's going back to this whole serving food aspect. Another recent example is actually West Ham's move to the Olympic Stadium, because you had an entire community around the Boleyn Ground who made their living off of match day, like the people who were selling your hot dogs and your burgers and stuff. And now, when you look at West Ham now, it's pretty much completely commercialised. You've got a shopping centre right by the stadium. You've got signs directing, shoppers one way, football fans the other way. There's absolutely no integration. And outside the stadium, they're selling all sorts of food. Like, I think there's even a Domino's outside of the stadium. Which,
yes, quality, mate.
Yes, Domino's is good. That's not the football experience. And West Ham, as we've seen on the pitch as well this season, have just been like the difference between last season and this season has been night and day. Perhaps last season was perhaps partly down to the fact that they were leaving the Berlin ground, but it's hard because obviously the FA and the EFL, they can't be total dictators over how clubs are run, but there should almost be some sort of vetting to make sure that these these owners, these chairmen who are going in to buy a club, run a club, be paying people's wages and making sure that people are employed at the end of the day. Not just your players and your managers, but also the ticket staff, like we said earlier, the people who run food shops, the helplines, all those sorts of things. You need to make sure that they are responsible, have the money, and care enough about the club that they are buying.
I think the thing about vetting is that it's quite hard to gauge until they're already within the club and the rot's already set in. But my next question, completely unrelated to that, but still sticking with football owners, it's more like an exam question, really, but I will pose this to you, Chris.
Oh, God. Leave me out of this. I'm out.
You had the first question, which Chris just intervened on. When you're younger, you sort of think that the players are the ones that dictate the club's success. And then you get a bit older, sort of maybe just like younger than us, and it's the managers that are the driving force behind the club's success or downfall. But then the old adage sort of goes, as you get older, you realise it's actually the owners that are almost solely responsible for a club's success, and then everything that happens beneath that, then it's almost like a feudal system. It all goes back up to the owner ultimately. Bearing that in mind, would you consider Arsenal to be a badly run club?
When you look at how Kroenke and Usmanov handled the move from Highbury to the Emirates, it was pretty smart business because they were restricting the money that they were spending on players to ensure that they could recuperate the funds from purchasing the new stadium, of course, and the help from like the sponsorship with Emirates for the naming rights and so on is also going to help them in that regard. But now it's been almost 10 years now.
This is their 10th or 11th season, yeah.
Surely by now, with the amount that Arsenal season tickets cost and the amount that just normal tickets cost as well, and with all the sponsorship that a club like Arsenal get, surely by now they should be able to be spending far more in like the transfer market. It may come down to the fact that now Wenger has sort of developed this mindset of I need to restrict my payment. Perhaps that could be changing now because he spent I think it was 34 million on Granit Xhaka. But
don't mention his name.
Sorry about that. I forgot that he scored against you.
Well, I think Ander Herrera was arguably more to blame for that goal than Granit Xhaka, but you know.
In fairness, Ander Herrera was meant to be going into, I think it was True Geordie who spoke about this. He was meant to be following in the footsteps of a hard man like Roy Keane, but then he's like, oh no, I'm going to turn away from the ball.
Yeah, that's appalling, to be fair. See, it's supposed to be your kind of hard man as well.
We're going off topic here.
Yeah, sorry.
We probably could just move on to the dugout debate just for time purposes, if nothing else.
Because you don't want to insult your team anymore. You're not used to it. It's normally
Chris, this is what you're doing. This is what I used to do, all right? It's my time to shine.
Wow.
It's my time to shine, Chris. Right. So, as I mentioned at the beginning of that topic, this dugout debate will be related to that. Namely, the worst football club owner in the Football League and Premier League inclusive. So as usual, when I'm presenting, we'll go to Chris and Alex and to myself. So Chris, who's your pick?
My picks are, it's two people really. It's owner and chairman. The father and son duo of Owen and Carl Oyston at Blackpool. Yes, beautiful. Blackpool is making another appearance in one of my picks for these debates. This time it is slightly different.
Yes, the famous Blackpool
This
debate.
time you've actually got some legitimacy in your argument.
I have, unlike Oscar Pistorius, I have a leg to stand on. Blackpool on their rise to the Premier League, they'd been sort of everyone's favourite underdog. They were led by pretty much legendary manager Ian Holloway. And obviously, they've been quite a meteoric rise. Owen Oyston had become a major shareholder at the club in 1987. So he's been with Blackpool for almost 3 decades now. So he's certainly had his time to make his mark with the Tangerines, and made his mark he has for worse rather than better. Because just looking at some of the stuff that has happened to Blackpool over recent years, not only have they been relegated to League Two now since being in the Prem in 2010-11, I think it was, or it may have been 11-12. It was 10-11, and now they're in League Two. Admittedly, they've made the playoffs, I believe, but still. At the start of the 2014-15 season, the club had lost 27 players and were left, just 2 weeks before the season began, they were left with just 8 professional players, 8 senior players.
Get a 7-a-side game out of that.
Bear in mind, no goalkeeper. No keeper. And a lot of the Blackpool fans have just been accusing both Owen and Carl of neglecting the club for their own personal financial means. So this is a perfect example of owners and chairmen who just don't care about the team that they're owning or the fans that they're supposed to be representing. So I'm opting for Blackpool's owner and chairman, Owen and Carl Oyston.
Last, I know that you mentioned briefly in the previous topic about Leyton Orient, but I assume you'll want to elaborate on that, so go ahead.
Yeah, there's some major foreshadowing going on, but I'm talking about Becchetti, who's the owner of Leyton Orient. And much like Chris, I'll kind of reel off some stuff that hopefully shows why he's a terrible manager. And I know we kind of got into a habit of saying this every week, but there's no real, wrong answer here. There's no 1953 FA Cup final. These are all horrendous owners. But yeah, I'll tell you some things about Becchetti. So in the 2013-14 season, you had... calm down, Josh. You had Leyton Orient 45 minutes away from being in the Championship. They were 2-0 up against Rotherham, then they lost 4-3 on penalties in the playoff final. And we're looking now, it's the end of the 2016-17 season, and they're down to the National League. They've just been relegated from League Two, having had a terrible, terrible season, which is largely due to the ownership. So in 2.5 years, they've had 9 managerial changes. So Becchetti's let them have absolutely no stability whatsoever. He himself got a 6-match ban for kicking the assistant manager a couple of years ago. So, again, setting a wonderful example to, players and fans and staff alike. He hasn't paid his staff since February, which is obviously something I mentioned earlier. And he officially now, the court pushed back an order, I believe, June the 12th. And if he doesn't sell the club or pay off his debts by June the 12th, the club will be liquidated. Now, bear in mind, this is a guy who's saying, I can't afford to pay $6,000 to a long-serving staff member who owns a £20 million mansion. This guy is the definition of somebody who only cares about their own wealth. He didn't invest in the football club for the love of the game. He invested in the football club for the love of the money. And he has dragged this club down with him in the pursuit of financial gain, which also hasn't happened for him. So those are some brief reasons why I think Becchetti is arguably the worst football manager of recent times.
Okay, well, I'm going for the footballing heavyweight and poultry business owners, Venky's, who took over...
I can imagine why they're called heavyweights.
Well, yeah, they are rather portly. Yeah, so they took over 99.9% of the Blackburn shares in November 2010 for £23 million, including £23 million of the club's debt. Within a month, they sacked Premier League stalwart Sam Allardyce for no particular reason. They were in 13th at the time, he achieved 10th in his only full season at the club, which is pretty decent for, relatively speaking, for Blackburn at that time.
Yeah.
He then replaced him with little-known Steve Keane, and he's little-known for a reason, because he's a crap manager. What he is.
Bang!
And, well, apparently, I say apparently according to Wikipedia, Keane was installed because his agent, Jerome Anderson, had played a role in advising Benke's takeover of the club. So, that's probably quite a large reason as to why he got the job in the first place, but clearly never should have, because in the 11-12 season, Blackburn saw their second relegation in the Premier League era down to the second division, which is where they stayed up until the most recent season, which is this season, where they've dropped down once again to the third tier in League One under the guidance of Tony Mowbray. And let's just count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, he's their 8th manager since the Venkies have taken over. And if you just look at the league positions, so in Sam Allardyce's the sort of only season that he was there, he was sacked when they were in 13th in the Premier League. Steve Keane then took them to a 15th place finish, so he'd taken them 2 places down already by the end of that season. The following season, his only full season in charge at Ewood Park, he got them relegated in a position of 19th in the Premier League. He then resigned when they were in 3rd in the Championship, replaced by former Blackburn player Henning Berg, where he was sacked not long after 57 days when they were in 17th. Then shortly after that, Michael Appleton lasted 2 months in charge before being sacked when they were in 18th. Then Gary Bowyer took charge, guided them back up to 17th, and then took them to 8th and 9th place finishes before a 16th place sort of start, then got him the sack. Paul Lambert then resigned at the end of the 15-16 season after guiding them to 15th. Owen Coyle was sacked in February this year after leaving them in 23rd, which is second bottom of the division, and Tony Mowbray can only guide them to 1 place higher, which was 22nd, third bottom, and relegation to League One. So I think if you had a graph of where they were when they took over to where they are now, it's just a steady decline.
Shitstorm.
So I think it's no coincidence that if you look at the managers they sacked and the managers that they've put in place, there's a clear correlation between where they were and where they are now, and for that reason,
29 places dropped. Jesus.
Yeah,
29.
For that reason, I have to go for Venkies. So I suppose I'd better start the rebuttal off. I'll kick off with you, Chris, just because you went first. The thing about the Oystons is that I do believe that they are fans of Blackpool Football Club. So as much as they have been, doing whatever they've been doing with their finances, there's a part of me that still likes to believe that they've still got the club in their heart somewhere. Whereas I think with Venkies, they've just come from India and just thought, I know what I'll do, I'll buy a football club. And that's what they've done, and they've completely destroyed it. And the same with Piketty at Leyton Orient. He just thought, something else to add to my portfolio. Whereas I'm as far as I'm aware, the Oystons were actually took over a lot of the debt that Blackpool had, and even I think they transferred some of their money from other businesses into the club as a loan, and the only reason they've been taking so much money out of it recently is sort of reclaiming that loan.
Well, they may claim to be fans, but they have absolutely no respect for their fans. And just to go back quickly to the financial aspect, yes, that may be true, but if you're owning a football club, you cannot take any funds out of that. You have to be completely invested in the side that you now own. Just as a quick sort of stat as to how bad that got the finances for them, their keeper at one stage was forced to borrow a shirt off of a fan because they couldn't afford the kits. What else was there? They got through, since their relegation from the Prem, they've gone through 7 official managers and 3 caretakers. So in a similar vein to the hiring and firing. What else is there? Let's see. But just going quickly to the absolute lack of respect that they have for the club and the fans. Carl Oyston, the chairman, once called a fan a massive retard and an intellectual cripple. What else is there?
That fan's going to sue you for that.
After all the protests, he taunted the fans by getting a number plate with "Oyst Out" written on it.
That's unreal. Oh my god.
So awful. What else? Owen Owen Oyston once sued a supporter who was a pensioner out of £20,000 over a Facebook comment. And perhaps the worst of it all was that during the protests, they removed the statue of club legend Stan Mortensen as a statement.
Why didn't they put the entire 1953 FA Cup final squad there in their place?
Well, guess who was playing in that 1953 FA Cup
Stan
final?
Mortensen, yeah, I know.
He's the only player to have scored a hat-trick in an FA Cup final.
Wrong dugout debate, Chris.
And they removed his statue as a statement because the fans were going to make them all upset.
But
they do not give a shit about the supporters.
One thing I want...
Can I just say, screw my argument. I would make the point that Chris is just sort of saying why the Oystons are the biggest arseholes as opposed to actually the worst club owners. But just I want you to win, Chris. That's quality. They got a number plate saying Oyster.
Number plate.
That's unreal.
Oyster out. They just don't give a single fuck.
That's amazing. That's correct.
One thing I will say about Blackpool, if I go back to sort of graph illusion, Blackpool did reach the Premier League. You know, I'm not sure whether there are any fans that would have rather have stayed in the Championship and not gone to the Premier League than had that one season in the Premier League, have that glory, and then be where they are now. I'm not sure whether fans would rather have had that one season in the Premier League and then drop down again, or just been a sort of nothing club, so to speak, and just stayed that way. I just wonder what you'd make of that.
Well, yes, that's just one aspect of it, but you also have to consider how Blackpool actually managed to get to the Prem. I believe it was on the back of a couple of consecutive promotions. So with that mindset, you sort of have to feel that things can only get better for Blackpool, whereas things, as we obviously saw, only got worse. So what do you make of that?
Well, I'll just say that I'm not going to deny for 1 second that the Oystons are completely terrible owners. But you see, for me, with, say, Venky's, for example, I think it's very clear that the successive relegations are down to the owners just because of the drastic change of fortune that occurred when they took over. As with Blackpool, I'm not sure whether you'd give them credit for the rise as well as the fall of Blackpool Football Club.
Yeah, it's hard because they've been there obviously a lot longer than Venky's and Bacchetti have. But I did do a little bit of digging, and I found a sort of interview that former Blackpool player Darren O'Day gave. He was there for less than a season, bear in mind, and he he stated that pub teams are run better than Blackpool, and I think it was Ryan Bailey from Kick TV. He said that's an insult to pub teams.
Ooh, burn.
We just put a warning before that. That's offensive beyond description.
Just going back to one previous thing I said, if you don't already think that Owen Oyston is an absolute cock, let's just bear in mind what he's done with his cock. In 1996...
Oh, wow. We have to stop it there.
I said previously I don't give a fuck.
None of that.
Oh my God, Chris. I can't believe you just said that.
I feel so awful right now. In 1996...
We can't see you. You're
It's just you in the pyramids.
Oh dear. There we go. I was hiding from Owen Oyston.
Right.
And his cock.
I've killed Josh. I've won the debate.
In fact, can we just point out, the thing is, jokes aside, that was an unbelievable transition. Can I just say, that I'm actually so impressed with you think he's a cock. What's he done with this cock?
Oh, my dick.
I've not even got to it yet.
Yeah, I was going to say, ignore
Like,
Josh for...
I haven't done it yet.
Like, like a phrase I'd never thought I'd say. I would actually quite like to know what he's done with his cock now.
Let's let me enlighten you, dear friend.
Why do you think Chris can't sit down?
This
What
just
have I been doing for the last 45 minutes?
Chris is just a metaphor for Blackpool Football Club.
I am the spokesperson for Blackpool on the channel.
God almighty, it's gone off the rails again.
In 1996, Owen Oyston was convicted of rape and indecent assault on a 16-year-old girl, and he received 3 years and 6 months in prison for it, and then was released and was still able to run a football club.
As bad as
So
that
the fact of the matter is, that's so dark, and Josh was just sitting there trying not to laugh because of
I'm saying, as bad as that is, and obviously you can't...
This is going to turn more into a rant at the FA for allowing...
That doesn't make him a bad owner because he went to prison.
It makes him an awful
person. It makes him a complete cretin. It makes him a bad person.
I know it's completely unrelated to him running Blackpool Football Club, but it's just to reiterate how much of an awful human being he is.
The big question is, how long have you been waiting to say that whole set phrase?
Which set phrase?
He's a massive...
If you thought he was a cop.
I just came up with that on the spot.
Yeah, of course, you're secret.
I was originally going to go for, I said he doesn't give a fuck, but it turns out he does in some cases. That was the one I was going for, but then I'd already said that, and I was like, oh, this could work. Unfortunately, it got me fucking kicked out of the call, but I don't care because that was a fucking good transition.
I think we have to end it there for our own sanity.
Yes, another debate is in absolutely fucking no conclusion.
Fair enough, end the debate, because I mean, time and the fact that you're incapable of currently making a sentence.
Someone who has now completely destroyed their club, and that's fucking Bichetti.
If Chris comes out with a phrase like that, how do you expect me to react? Seriously. You know that it doesn't take much for me to lose it. So when he comes out with something like that, what are you expecting? But I think...
This has been a roller coaster of a debate. We've gone from talking about mental health, something as serious as mental health, to now something... We went from bloody talking about, oh, nobody wanted to do that with me, and now we're on to talking about someone who was convicted of fucking rape.
I think we can probably say that for the first time in history, the 12-episode history of the Dugout debate, that Chris has won. But he kind of has...
But he hasn't won because his debate was good. He won because he came up with the best line ever.
But he's kind of tarnished that by just coming up...
Josh managed to win the worst manager of the Premier League because he made us both piss ourselves.
To be fair,
I didn't even get a chance to fucking defend.
All right, go on then. Defend.
I was want to defend Bichetti as an awful human being.
I have no words.
Well, yeah. Because not being funny, whatever we have to say, we can't quite beat the Oystons.
We can't question any of these people are awful human beings.
Well, just because of how bad. I mean, the Venkis, as far as I'm aware, haven't gone to prison for rape. Probably for battery farming or something, but not for rape. And I think
Bichetti's able to own a £20 million mansion in Mayfair but not pay his staff for fucking since February.
Does it count as rape if you don't consensually fuck a football club?
That's why I said Chris is a metaphor for Blackpool Football Club. That's what I meant.
Jesus.
Oh my God.
So
just end the episode.
Just to avoid getting this channel shut down, a prison sentence for us all, and just for our own sanities, I think...
We'll see you in a few months, Oyston.
I think... yeah, we'll see him in prison. I think it's time to draw this...
Just don't drop the soap, boys.
To draw episode 12 to an end. Like, once again, no one really cares who won. We got a good cheeky laugh out of... Or at Owen Oyston's expense.
Quote Josh Samuels. I know I didn't say it this time, but it's always implicit. The best episode.
In my defence, the two times that I've said it, they were the two best episodes, so... Make that what you will. But yeah, obviously we've had some really sensitive topics and some slightly more light-hearted ones, only slightly more. Next week, who knows what's going to happen in the next week of football, but whatever happens,
Alex will actually
it'll be Alex leading you through it, hopefully with some cleaner language from Chris.
No.
And until our next episode, we'll see you then. Thanks for watching.
Bye.
And we apologise profusely. Right.
Okay.
My God. For more footballing content from In the Dugout, like, follow, share and subscribe. And don't forget to check out our Facebook, Instagram and Twitter pages.